Greetings, modeling and simulation students. We are moving on to data visualization. And a lot of this, or this entirely, is going to be in 2 dimensions, which is sort of unusual for Mod Sim, though some of you did 2-dimensional games. So what we're going to be doing in this unit is using Adobe Illustrator, which you have not used yet in this course. Some of you are going to already be comfortable with Adobe Illustrator because you're in modeling, and in digital visualization. So you've already spent some time, or a lot of time, using Adobe Illustrator, but many of you are not. So in this video, there's going to be a sort of step-by-step or tool-by-tool or capability-by-capability instruction about Adobe Illustrator. Of course, there's tons of other information about how to use Adobe Illustrator online, but this video should contain everything you need to create a number of data visualizations. And you're going to learn more about data visualizations by watching 2 PBS videos, crash courses in statistics number 5 and number 6. So the first one's called Charts Are Like Pasta, Data Visualization Part 1. And the second one is called Plots, Outliers, and Justin Timberlake, Data Visualization Part 2. And they're really good videos explaining how we use visual representations of data to make data easier to understand. It also talks a little bit about how visual representations can be intentionally created to be misleading. So it's good information for you to have. I'm going to ask you to watch these 2 videos and then use Adobe Illustrator to make a number of representations of data. You can either collect the data yourself from classmates or however you want to do it. I don't care what data you're representing. I care about the way that you are representing it. So you're going to take in some sort of data. You might research it and find it on the internet. You might create a poll that you send to your classmates. There's lots of different ways that you can collect data, and I don't care what the data is on. I prefer for it to be interesting. But the crash course videos will talk about frequency tables. They'll talk about bar charts, pie charts, pictographs, histograms, dot plots, stem and leaf plots, and a number of other ways to represent data visually. What I want for you to do is, after watching the videos and watching this video and learning better how to use Adobe Illustrator, I want you to create 5 different data representations using Adobe Illustrator. And so you can use any of these ones that I just went over, or anything else, any of the other data representations that you find inside of the crash course videos. What I do want you to do is make sure that you use the tools in Illustrator to make your representations as accurate as possible. So for example, when you learn how to use the line tool, make sure let's say that you are creating a pie chart like this, and you need to make lines that are going to go at the correct angle to properly represent whatever it is that you are demonstrating. So what I mean by that is, if you create a line and you're going to need to represent 1/4 of something being used in a pie chart, well, we know that 1/4 of a pie chart, or of a circle, would be 90 degrees, right? So if you create a line that's 0 degrees across, then you need to create a 90-degree line so that you're now cutting out 1/4 of the pie. And whatever it is that whatever part of 360 that your data needs to represent, make sure your lines use the correct angles so that it accurately represents your data. For a pictograph, so this one is basketball participation. And if let's say basketball participation is 1.5 times greater in 2017 than it is in 2016, you need to, when you scale your circle that you're using to draw the basketball, you need to make sure that you actually scale it by 1.5 or 150%, so that your representations of data are accurate. So that's what I'm asking you to do. You're going to create 5 different visual representations of data. I want you to put those representations on a Google slide presentation, similar to what I've got here. But of course, you're going to use your own original data and create your images that you can then save as PNGs or JPEGs and put them inside of a Google slide presentation with I want a label of what kind of a visualization it is, and then just a little bit of information here. You could type in, where you got your information from and what the percentages are on the same slide as your actual visual representation. So that's going to be your next project. Let's get to work on that, and I look forward to seeing what you do. Stay tuned to this same video for quite a lengthy explanation of a number of the capabilities of Adobe Illustrator. If you need more help learning to use Illustrator, I'm always here.
Creating an Illustrator file. So of course, to begin any kind of a job, you've got to create a file, you've got to open the application. So let's go ahead and open up Illustrator. I'll just double click on the icon. Your splash screen might look different. Illustrator updates all the time. That's one of the great things about the Creative Cloud. So I'm going to create a new file. You can select that here. If you come up to a different screen, you might go File, New from the drop-down menus. And then you've got to select what kind of file you're making. So it helps you up here. You've got mobile. So you've got dimensions if you're designing a mobile application for a variety of different mobile devices. Android, iPhone, Nexus. Okay, so you've got web, number of different scales here. iMac 27 down to 800 by 600 pixels. You've got common right here. I'm going to select web large. You've got print dimensions, letter size right here. Over on the side, you can choose whether you want to look at the dimensions in points, inches, millimeters, centimeters, pixels. If you're developing for print, inches is probably going to be a good idea because that's probably what you're going to get your information in. So here you go, 8.5 by 11 is letter size. But let's go back over to web, and I'm going to select web large. This is in pixels, 1920 by 1080. And I'm just going to click create. You can look here if you wanted to change it to portrait. If you want to have more artboards, so in this example, I'm just going to have one version of what I'm working on. Let's say I want to have multiple artboards. I'll show you what that means. I'll add a second one in, and I'll click create. So now you can see I've got two artboards side by side. So let's say I wanted to develop two versions of a website splash page, say, and I wanted to be able to look at them right next to each other or develop simultaneously and do two different options on either side so that at the end I can compare the two. This might be the reason you do that. There's tons of different reasons you'd want multiple artboards. So here I developed with two. You could just use the slider bars right here. I'm going to focus in on one of them. So I'm just going to use the slider bar here, and I'm pretty good. If you look at the one over here, okay. Then I'm just going to hold down Command or Control and plus to zoom in. And that's creating a new file with Adobe Illustrator. So we have an Adobe Illustrator file open. Let's take a look at the interface. First, we've got the overall application frame. You can see that it's just the outline of the overall Adobe Illustrator application. And you can change the size of that frame just by dragging here as I am. This bar across the top, the application bar, if you're going to be moving around the application, let's say you need to see specific other applications that might be open on your desktop without switching to another desktop, you can just grab that application bar at the top and move around here. Over here, you've got your tools panel, which contains the tools for creating and editing images. And then you've got your control panel up here. Right now I have nothing selected on my artboard, so that no properties for a specific object are coming up here, but that's what will appear up here. And then you've got your properties panels over here, which will reflect properties in a variety of different areas depending on what kind of a project you're working on. This tab right here is going to be the tab that reflects the various projects that are open. You can have multiple tabs open if you're working on multiple different Illustrator files at once. And those are just the basics of the Essentials workspace in Adobe Illustrator. Probably the most fundamental tool in Illustrator is the selection tool, or the black arrow. So you can of course select that just by clicking in your tool panel, or you can see in parentheses when I hover over it, there's a V. That tells you about your direct selection from the keyboard. Just hitting the keystroke of V on your keyboard will also select the direct selection tool. So if I'm not on it, you can see, let's select the line tool. If I'm using the line tool and I want to switch to the selection tool or the black arrow, I can just click on it, of course, in the tool panel, or push down the V button on my keyboard, and that switches me to the selection tool. Now, to use the selection tool, I need something to select. So I'm going to move over to my second artboard where I've put in two objects, a circle and a square. So I'll just center that on the screen, and then there are two ways to select. I can just click on the object, and now I've selected it, or I can drag across two objects if I want to select multiple objects. So I select both of them that way. So here I select just the square, here I select both. Also, you can click on an object and then hold down the Shift key and select on another object, and that allows you to select that way. So that's the very basics of the selection tool. Remember, you can click, drag across, or click, hold down Shift, and click. Okay, so let's learn about the line segment tool. If you look over here at your tools panel, there's going to be a variety of different icons. We're going to use this one right here, the line segment tool. Now, you see this little triangle that shows up in the bottom right-hand corner of the icon. That means there's other tools underneath of the one that's being displayed. So if I just click and hold on that tool, you'll see 4 tools in addition to the line segment tool show up. If I want to pull this whole panel out so I can see all of the tools at once, I'll just go over to this triangle that's going to be on the side of the pull-out panel here and click on that. And now it gives me this pull-out panel with all 5 of the tools. I don't really need that right now. I'm just going to use this line segment tool for the moment. I just closed this one out. Okay, so we're going to use this line segment tool. Remember, when you're using Illustrator, you're using a vector art program. And so it's built upon mathematical models for lines in a 2-dimensional space. So what we're creating when we create lines are called paths. And a path is made up of one or more straight or curved segments. So right now we're just going to make straight segments. And to do that, we're just going to select the line segment tool. And I'm just going to click and drag in the direction that I want the line to go. And when I let go, I've got a line segment. Now, the stroke of the line segment is the thickness of the particular line segment. And I've got a menu up here where I can just select and see a variety of numbers, or I can just manually select from these arrows. So if I want to go do a 10-point stroke, I just click here, and now you can see the line segment's that thick. So there you have it. I've created a line. Now, if I just want to create another line, I just click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. Okay, so that's the most basic use of the line segment tool, just to create lines. The other way that you can use that tool, instead of just clicking and dragging, is you can just click at the point where you want the line to start from, and this menu box will pop up and you'll type in a value. So to give you a better view of how the value you type in affects the angle of the line, let's just take a look here on the other artboard I've selected. So I'm going to cancel this, and I'm just going to move over to the second artboard in my file. And I want you to just imagine that this black dot is where I am clicking to start my line segment from. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that black dot. Actually, let me lock these panels before I do that. And I'm just going to click right here. And that same menu is going to come up. So the length of the line in pixels right now, the ones that are drawn already here are 100 pixels. So I'm going to go twice as long as those, and I'll go 200 pixels. That's just going to be the length of the line. So now we're talking about the angle of the line in this second box here. So if I type in 90 degrees, you can see how this now reflects the direction the line's going to go. And that matches up to the 90 degrees line that I've already drawn on this example. If I go to 180, you can see that's what I'm going to get, which matches up to the blue 180. And you can obviously imagine if I type in 270, then I'm going to get a line that corresponds to the green 270 line here. So what do you think I'll get if I type in 45? What will that line look like? Click OK, and there you have it. Okay, so that's a 45-degree line. So that's the other way that you control the line segment tool. So now you have the ability to draw lines by dragging across the screen with the line segment tool, or you can draw them by controlling the menu. Another thing you can do is when you're drawing lines, let me get rid of these ones that I've already drawn. And now let's select our line tool again, and I'm dragging across. Okay, you can see that little yellow guide, hopefully, that gives you an idea of where the line would be if I dropped from dragging across here. But now let me hold down the Shift key. If I'm holding down the Shift key simultaneously to dragging across the screen, it's going to constrain the radius of my line by 45-degree chunks. So you see as I drag across, the line snaps to a variety of angles divisible by 45 degrees. So that makes it a lot easier to draw parallel and perpendicular and just control the radius of your line. So there's one, here's one at 45, 90, 145. Okay, so that's another handy tool when you're using the line segment tool. So you have a pretty good understanding now of how to control the direction of your lines as you create them, and the distance or length of lines as you create simple line segments. To use the pen tool, select the fountain pen icon or hit the letter P on your keyboard. Click on the artboard to create line segments. Click and drag to create curved line segments. You'll create these Bezier handles when you create curved line segments, and you can manipulate them using the white arrow. Click on them and drag them around like so, and change the properties of a curved line. Click delete to go backwards, deleting anchor points. Click consecutively, then back to the original anchor point to create a solid shape that you can then give fill value to by clicking on the fill box here, and if you double click, it'll give you a color picker tool. You could click on swatches, Pick a color and select OK. Click in the middle of a line segment to create a new anchor point. You can also, of course, create closed-in curved lines. Again, you're creating the Bezier handles. Work your way around. And here you've got a closed shape. The basic shape tool can be located from this icon or by pressing the letter M on your keyboard. So there are several basic shape tools. So once again, you have several tools embedded under this same icon slot in your tool panel. So if I click and hold down on this icon that looks like a rectangle, you'll see that there's the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool, polygon, star tool, and flare tool. We'll take a look at each of these, but not the flare tool right now. It's a little more complex and it's more of an effect than a basic shape. So let's just start with the rectangle tool. And the easiest thing to do to create a rectangle is to just drag across the screen. And you'll see I've got this blue guide box that's showing what the rectangle will look like when I'm done. And there you go. Now this one is got a black outline or a black stroke. So the edge of the shape when we draw shapes is called the stroke, and the color value for the stroke can be found right here. You can see there are the two boxes. If you hover over them, they say whether they are the stroke or the fill value. We'll talk about fill in just a moment. But the stroke value, if you hover over, now at the moment this is the top one, but I can change that by hitting X. But the stroke right now is black, and that's the color value. The size of the stroke is right here. You can click up to make that thicker. Now I've got a 10-point stroke on this rectangle. The fill color, I can double click on the other square here. And here's a color selection. I can use a slide up and down here to get different parts of the spectrum. And then I can select from this panel, or I can select color swatches here. And the default color picker swatches are available. And so I'm just going to make it red for the fill. There you go. So a black 10-point stroke with a red fill. Now, using still this same tool, the rectangle tool, if I hold down Shift when I drag, it will constrain what I create to a square. See, so I can drag anywhere on the screen. It will only let me draw squares. There you go. If I want to invert the color property, so I've got red fill and black stroke, I can just click these arrows right here and swap that out. Okay. Now let's take a look at another one of our basic shape tools, the rounded rectangle tool. You can drag out a rectangle just the same way, but it's got rounded corners. And if I use my up and down arrows, I can adjust, rather my left and right arrows, I can adjust the amount of rounding. So the left arrow gives me a rectangle, to the right gives me this heavily rounded capsule shape. Moving on, Let's open up the ellipse tool. And you can just drag to create various ellipses. If you hold down on the shift key, it will constrain you to a circle. So there's a circle, there's an ellipse, another one. So that's the ellipse tool. Polygon tool. You can just drag this out. Then my up and down arrow can add another edge to the polygon. You can go all the way down to a triangle and click all the way up, pentagon and further. Okay. Next, I've got the star tool. It works like the polygon tool. However, when you use the up arrow, it adds a point to the star. Down arrow, it subtracts all the way down to a triangle. And that's the basics of the star tool. As always, there's much more to every element of these Adobe applications, but those are the basics of how to use the basic shape tools. The layers panel is really important for both the appearance and the organization of your artwork. When you're creating a piece of art in Illustrator and you've opened up a new file, in the layers panel, you'll initially have just one layer called layer 1. So if you create anything to go inside of this artboard, it's going to show up in layer 1. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to select the shape tool and I'm just going to go ahead and make a rectangle. There you go. So now that rectangle is falling under the category or the first layer known as layer 1, and it's called rectangle. And here's layer 1 up here. So let's change the name of layer 1 and we'll just call it original. I'm just calling that because that's the original layer that was created. And here's our rectangle. We'll call this white rectangle. Okay, and if I widen this layer, this layers panel, now I can read the entire word that's in there. So now you see there's this caret next to original, so I can see the items that are inside of it. So I'm still working on the original layer, and I'm going to select the shape tool again, and let's go with just the ellipse tool, and I'm going to drag across and create that. And let's actually change the color to make it more distinguishable. I'll just make it green. Okay, and now let's call this green oval. Okay, so now inside of the original layer, if I open it up by clicking again on this arrow that's right there, so it points down, I can see both the green arrow and the white rectangle. Now, if I click on the target next to the overarching sort of layer, the original layer, if I click on that, it's now going to select both of these objects. Okay, if I click off of them, they're gone. And I can then, again, I could click on the target here to select just the oval, or here to select the white rectangle. I could hold down Shift and then select this to select both of them if I want to. Okay, now I'm going to close this and I'm going to create a new layer. The way you create a new layer is just, looks like a little post-it note or something down here folded over. Just click on that and now I've got a new layer. And it's called layer 2. Let's just leave it called layer 2. I could double click on this and change the name if I wanted to, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna leave this called layer 2. And now I'm working in layer 2. See how this is highlighted? If I want to create another object now, and let's click over here, I'll just hold down over the shape tool and then select the star tool. I'm just gonna make a little star here. And again, let's just color it just to make it a little easier. We'll make it blue. Okay, so now we've got a blue star there. And as you can see, that's in layer 2 and it's highlighted like this. If I fly open layer 2, you'll see there's the actual star. I'm going to double click on this and call it blue star. Still working in this layer, I'm going to add another shape. Make a polygon. Let's make it purple. So now I can open up layer 2, select this layer, double click on it and call it purple polygon. Okay. Now I can, again, open and close this layer. So once again, if I select the target for the overall layer, it'll select both items in that layer. See, I've got both the blue star and the polygon selected. I can click off and not have those. I can then click the layer. Once again, I've got them both. Click off, I can select one by itself. I can hit Shift and select that one. Click off. Now, again, I can open up both of these layers, and now everything is visible to me, and I can still shift click. See, I could click on the purple polygon, and then I could go down here to the white rectangle, hold down Shift, and click on that. And now I've selected items in different layers. But if I want to just select the items in one layer, I can go to, again, to the target next to original, click on that, and it'll switch, and I'm just going to select the items inside of this original layer. Now, here's a very important factor. Imagine that you are stacking panes of glass with each layer. So the bottom pane of glass has a picture of a white rectangle on it. So that's the bottom of the stack. The purple polygon is like a pane of glass with a purple polygon on it, and that's the top stack, and you're looking down through the glass. So what I mean by that is, let's reposition the purple polygon over the white star. It is the top layer. And it's also above the blue star. So if I move the blue star over here, it's going to mask that part of the blue star. See, and both of them are above the white rectangle, so they'll mask that. Now let's just go ahead and move the green oval over, and you can sort of guess how is this going to look when I drag it over? What parts of the green oval are you going to see and not see if I drop it right here? Okay, so again, with the panes of glass analogy, it's beneath both the purple polygon and the blue star. To make it more vivid, maybe if I change this from being white to, let's make it black. Again, you can see it's the purple polygon on top, then the blue star, the green oval, the white rectangle, and then finally the artboard. Okay, so that's how you can sort of understand when you're stacking items how they're going to appear. This is a fundamental thing to Illustrator when you're creating images, the stacking order or the layering order of objects and the way that they will appear. So it's very important for you to understand that when you're working on things. And also it's important for you to label the different objects that you put into a piece of artwork, because it's going to make it so much easier to revise your work after you finally created it. If you decide, you know what, I really want to change this this green oval here, it would be very difficult. You might have 50 items inside of a complicated picture to find it, but if you have it named properly, it make it a lot easier to sort of open up and find in a list of things. Sometimes it might not be just as easy to click on an item, and here's another reason why it might be difficult. So if we look in this layers panel, you're going to see this eyeball next to each item. If you click on the eyeball, it's going to make that item disappear. So watch, the purple polygon will go away now. So that's what the eyeball does. I can make the green oval go away this way and then bring them back by clicking. And then also, if you're working on something you don't want, let's say I want to move the oval and the star and the polygon, but I don't want to move the black rectangle. If I marquee drag across the item, so if just click and drag across with the select tool, that would select all of those objects. And if I'm doing detailed work, it might be the best way for me to select stuff, but I don't want to select the black rectangle when I do so. So what I'm going to do is go up here to the layers panel, and I'm going to click right here, and this box will lock the object so it can't be selected. So watch, when I drag across now, it won't select it. And if you notice before, it deselected it as soon as I clicked on it. Watch, I'll do that with the star. Now that's not selected. So I can then drag these items and move them with it being impossible for me to affect the locked items, and then you can unlock. This is very fundamental to Illustrator too, when you're working on different items. For example, if you've got a background and you are working over top of that, so let's put let's put a background in here. So I'm going to create another layer by clicking on this, and I'm going to call this layer background. Now, because I want it to be behind everything else, I'm going to move it to the bottom layer. Okay, I'm going to select this layer because I want to be working on that one, and I don't want to affect these other two when I put in the background, so I'm going to lock them both. Now I can't do anything to them, so now I'm in the background. I'm going to select my shape tool, and I'm going to select a rectangle, and I'm going to go to the top corner here, and before I do, I'm going to select a different color. Let's do like a golden color. So now that's the color that's going to be filled. I'm going to have no outline, so I'm going to, for the stroke value, I'm just going to select this, which means nothing. Then I'm going to go to the top corner of my artboard, and I'm just going to drag across and make a rectangle that goes all the way across. So that's going to give me a background that covers the entire artboard. And there you go. So when I did that, I didn't affect any of the other items because they were all locked. And because it's lowest in the layer panel, it shows up underneath of everything else as a background. Now it's not quite wide enough, so I can go over here and adjust that by just clicking on this bounding box here, and you see there's this anchor point. Just click on that with the arrows pointing both to the left and the right, like that, and just drag to the right a little tiny bit to make sure I've covered the entire edge of the square, and click off here. Okay, so that's how you organize and label layers, also how you lock them and make them visible and invisible in Illustrator. Let's talk about stroke properties in Illustrator. So lines in Illustrator have a variety of properties known as stroke values. So let's go ahead and use the line segment tool, and let's draw a couple of paths. So I'm just going to go here, and I'll draw another one here. So now I've got two lines, and we're going to make some adjustments to these line segments using stroke properties. So right now, I don't have stroke properties panel up in my panel options, but I still have some stroke properties available. So this is your control panel area, and it responds or reflects the values of anything selected if you have something selected. So I'll select this line, and if you go up here, you can see this is the size of the stroke, and right now the weight of it is 10 points. So I can just use these arrows to adjust that value if I want to make it thicker or thinner, or I can click on this arrow and I can select a direct number for that stroke. Okay, now I've also got a couple of other values, the variable width profile and the brush definition. We're not going to worry about the brush definition yet, but the variable width profile, if you click on this, it gives you a variety of options. And so let's see, let's look at this one. This one starts thick and goes to thin. Okay, and if I reverse that, with this one, it starts thin, goes to thick, and then goes back down thin again. So you can see that's how you can use just this simple drop-down variable width profile. But what if you want even more options? So let's open up our window for stroke properties. And so you just click on this drop-down menu of window and select stroke, and this window is going to pop up. Okay, so first of all, you've got that weight still. So let's select this other line. So you've still got that weight, so I can go up, make it a pretty thick line. You have lots of options here, so I can go 100 point if I want to. right? Now we can control the cap. See here at the end of the line, I've got a straight line. I can go to a rounded line. And I can also go to a line that projects the cap out a little bit. See the difference? Okay, so I'm going to stick with my original. And then these would be corners and shapes. We're not going to affect that right now. I can put arrowheads on my lines. It's such a thick line that the arrowhead takes up basically the whole thing. So let's shrink this down to, let's go 10 points and see, now you've got your arrowhead like that. You have a variety of different arrows you can select from. I can swap which end the arrow's on using this. Okay. I can also control the profile here, just as I did from right here, but let's go like that. Now, one thing you can do here is, let's go again. All right, so now we're going from thick to thin, right? Let's get rid of the arrowhead for just a second, make it easier for you to see. So I'm going from thick to thin. I'll even make it a little thicker so you can see it easier. If I select right here, this will flip that. So look, bam. That's another degree of control that you have. You may want to have a dashed line, so I can select here, and now I've got a dashed line. And I can control the thickness of the dashes versus the gaps. They don't all have to be uniform. Like I could go 12, 10, 8, 6, 4. See, I'm creating a variety now in the staggering of my dashed line. Just get rid of that by unclicking. So that's the stroke control properties, or the stroke properties panel. And there's even more stuff in here that we haven't gone over, but that covers a lot of the options that you have in this stroke panel. The brush tool lets you make more stylized lines with more intuitive curves. You draw it either with your mouse by hand, or a lot of times the brush tool would be used with a stylus, such as with the Wacom tablet. To select the brush tool, just go up here. It looks like a paintbrush, and all you have to do is drag on the path there where you want to draw. It's a pretty plain line. See, it's selectable here, the kind of stroke you're going to have. There's also larger libraries and stuff. So if you wanted to use a more stylized type of stroke, you'd click here. Here, this is sort of a chalk outline, and then I will up the stroke value so it'll be easier for you to see the difference in the line. If you can sort of see how stylized the line is here, and then if I draw it just by dragging, so you can make, you know, whatever shape you happen to drag across. So that's the brush tool. Select the blob brush tool by clicking down on the paintbrush tool, and you'll get the sort of sidebar menu and select blob brush tool. You can also select it by holding down Shift and clicking on B on your keyboard. The blob brush tool is much like the brush tool, except it's going to give you both a fill and a stroke value for what you paint. When you use the brush tool, it just creates paths, so you only get a stroke value, but the blob brush gives you a fill and a stroke. So if I just go ahead and drag across the screen, and I create this organic shape with it, and I've got an object now that can have both a stroke and a fill value. When I first painted here, you can see that I've got nothing selected for a stroke value. So if I double click on this and go to color swatches, I can now give the stroke and fill value to the object that I've created. Now the problem here is that the stroke is set to only 1 point, so you can't see it. So if I just up that a bit, now it becomes visible. So the blob brush is frequently used in conjunction with the eraser tool to make, or sculpt almost, more organic and complex shapes in a sort of easier fashion when you can't just create it from using line segments and Bezier tools.
Okay, let's erase some stuff with the eraser tool. First, I'm just going to go ahead and make a rectangle so that we've got something to erase parts of. And then I'm going to select my eraser tool, and I can do that either with the E key on my keyboard, or here's the eraser tool right here. It's underneath of it is the scissors and the knife. We're not going to go over that stuff right now. It does sort of sound like a game of Clue, like murder weapons, but no, we're just going to go ahead and use the eraser tool. It's much safer. So now that I've selected it, you see that my cursor changed to these crosshairs type thing. I can use my bracket keys on my keyboard. So the closing brackets are going to make the eraser bigger and the opening bracket are going to make the key smaller. If you don't know what I mean by brackets, brackets look like this and that. So those are your brackets. So that was terrible. So I'm going to need the eraser tool. So I'm going to hit E on my keyboard, or actually, I think it's Shift and E on your keyboard. I'm going to hold down that, and I'm just going to use the eraser tool and get rid of that bad opening bracket. And let's draw another one so that you can really see. So the opening bracket looks like this. That's your opening bracket, and I mean, that's the opening bracket. And then the closing bracket is this one that looks like that. Okay, so when I hold down Shift and E on my keyboard and select the eraser tool, I can hold down the closing bracket and see how big that makes the eraser, and that makes it easy to erase a bunch of stuff. And then if I want to erase parts of my rectangle, I can just use my eraser tool that way, shrink it down to make it smaller, and you can do stuff like that. So here I'm actually not using the brush tool, I'm erasing. So that's taking that from the inside of the rectangle there. And see, once I erased like that, that circle around it made it a separate item from the rectangle. So I actually sort of removed that from it. And these are transparent areas. So if I create a rectangle, I'll draw it like this, and let's make it red. So I'm going to change the interior of it by double clicking, go to color swatches, select red, click OK, and place this here. And what I need to do, of course, is go to my layers menu and move it behind, and there you go. So you get that sort of effect. If I move it a little further down, I can go here and then move it over there and do that. But the eraser tool is super easy. Just Shift E to select it, or click on the icon there, and you can erase anything you need to.
The text tool icon is a letter T. It's right here. You could also hit T on the keyboard. When you select a text tool, you'll get a standard cursor. You can drag across the screen to create the area where you want the text to fill. And then it's going to fill it with some lorem ipsum. What I'll do here is then just type whatever I want to type on the screen. And you can see right now it's in a 12-point font, regular. There's font styles. Depending on the font you pick, there might be several. So I could switch this to bold. You can't really tell the difference here. And it's not going to change it unless you drag across your text and have it highlighted. So see, it's still regular even though I selected bold. If I had typed more, what I had typed would have been in bold once I selected that. But if I go here and select bold, it'll change my letters to bold. And then you can see that I've just got a 12-point font. So let's make that a little bigger by clicking up. Or I can click this drop down and just go immediately to a larger size. Now, there's a variety of different fonts that I can choose from by clicking that down arrow there, and then you'll see I have a whole slew of different fonts. You can also use Adobe Typekit to get more, but we're not going to do that right now. I'll just select one font, and there you go. Let's try a different one. This one's a little complicated, and I want to show you stroke and fill on these letters. So here's a more simple font. So right now, as you can see, it's a black fill and no stroke value. So if I highlight this, I can double click, of course, on the fill. I'm going to go to color swatches. I like to pick my colors that way. So now I've got a green fill. What about stroke? So I want to add a stroke to it, so I'll double click here and I'll pick red and we'll go Christmassy. So now I've got green with a little red around it, but that that stroke is not very pronounced around the edge. So if I go here and then increase the size of the stroke by I'll just go up arrow to do it. You can see now I can increase that. That was too much. So I'm going to go back down. And there you go. So that's stroke and fill on a font using the text tool. Now, there's a variety of other text tools here. If I just click and hold down, you can see there's type on a path, vertical type, vertical area. So if I go vertical type, now I'm going to be typing vertically, obviously. If I click type on a path tool, first I need to create a path. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm just going to select my pen tool. And there I've created this path. Go over here and switch the fill and the stroke on that. Okay, so to make it a little easier for you to see the path, I'll select it. And then I'm just going to increase the stroke value a little bit. This is just so you can see it. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select the type on a path tool. And I'm going to click right here and see how my lorem ipsum is that way, so that when I type, I'm going to type on the path that I created. That could be a very handy tool. So those are the basics of the text tool. There are several ways to scale objects in Illustrator. Just create a simple polygon here, about a star. So we'll do that. The first, and in my mind, easiest way to scale is by simply selecting one of the points along the bounding box of the object. If you want to scale and keep everything proportional, just click and hold down Shift at the same time, then drag. And you can drag in any direction and it will scale proportionately. Then if you don't want to scale proportionately, you can just hover over a spot, click and drag. See the effects there. So that's an easy way to scale. Also, you can select the scaling tool. It's right here. Or just use the S button on your keyboard. Then you're just going to select one or more objects. So I'm going to select the star, then I'll select the scaling tool. Then you can just click and drag to scale. If you want to scale relative to a different reference point, just click on the screen, move the cursor away from the point you've created, then click and drag. And now I'm scaling relative to this position. To maintain proportions, once again, just hold down the Shift key. So if I hold down Shift, then click and drag, the proportions of the star are remaining the same. You can also simply select Object Transform and Scale. Then if I want to scale in a uniform way, I'll click here and just type in a number. So let's say 75%. If I want to preview, I can just click here. And that's showing me how much I'll be scaling down if I scale 75%. So if I click OK. There's also the transform panel available here. Click. And there it is. You can scale along the X or Y axis. Width and height are here. If you click here, then they'll scale proportionately. So here, if I say I'm going to give it a scale, right now it's 473 pixels tall, more or less, 0.4. If I change that to 400, and I have the proportionate length, constraining width and height proportions selected, hit enter. Now it's going to change that height to 400 pixels and change the width proportionately. If I unclick this, change this to, say, 800. That's not going to force the constraints to stay the same.
So those are some of the ways to scale objects. Okay, let's rotate objects. The easiest way to rotate objects is just going to be with the bounding box. So here I'll just draw a star. There you go. And now with my selection tool, I can just hover around the bounding box until I get these curved arrows with 2 points and click and drag. There you go. That's 9 times out of 10 how I'll rotate stuff. So that's one way to do it. And then you can use the free transform tool if you want. So that's going to be over here. See, there's your little thumbtack. That's called the puppet warp tool. But if you just click and hold down on that, then you're going to get the side menu there. Select the free transform tool. And then the object's already selected. So now all I've got to do is position the pointer outside of the object anywhere, click and drag, and I can once again rotate that way. So then the other way that you can rotate an object is with the rotate tool itself. So here I'll draw another star. And now all I need to do is go ahead and select the rotate tool, which is right here. It looks like that. Select the rotate tool, and then just at this point, the center of the star is selected. So all I need to do to rotate the object around that center point is just click and drag anywhere on the artboard, and it's going to rotate relative to that center position, okay? Then the next thing I can do, if I want to rotate around a different reference point, then I can click and move this reference point. So I'm going to actually move it way up here and click. So now when I click and drag, see, it's rotating from that point. So that's very handy. And then if you wanted to rotate a copy of the object instead of the object itself, just hold down Alt or on a Windows or Option on a Mac, and then rotate after you drag. It's after you start to drag. So if I click and start to drag, and then I hold down Alt or Option and let go, see, it's going to make that copy that's rotated from that same point. So that's how you use the actual rotate tool itself. Okay. If you need a little better control, like to rotate at a specific angle, here I'll draw this star back again. Move this a little bit. Okay. For that, what you can do, if you want to rotate really specifically, select the object and then select the rotate tool, then Alt click where you want the reference point to be in the document window. So I can do this, select the rotate tool, and then Alt click. And see, I can now type in a specific angle. So if I go 45 and click OK, it's going to rotate around a 45-degree angle there. Okay, so those are some of the easiest ways to do it. You can also use the transform panel if you want to. So to do that, you could just go up to Windows and go to your transform, select that, and then here you can once again type in angles. So let's say I type in 90 degrees here. Oops. Right, I could type in 90, hit enter. So now it's going to be rotated at a 90-degree angle as opposed to what it was. Could go here, change it to 180, hit enter. And you're rotating based on, again, on this reference point. If you need to change the reference point, click and do that. So rotating is pretty easy in Adobe Illustrator. Okay, let's reflect on the reflect tool. I'll be here all week, everybody. So to use the reflect tool, just click on, I'll make an object, so I'm going to make this star again. And I'll move it kind of where I want it to be. And then to reflect, there's a couple of things you can do here. First, you can select the reflect tool, and then decide the axis you want to reflect across. So let's say I want to reflect moving like this direction across this axis. So I'm going to click here. And then my pointer is going to turn into, or rather that sort of crosshair is going to turn into an arrow. And then I'll go to sort of the next point on the line or axis I want it to reflect across. So when I click here, bam, it's going to reflect across that axis. So you see what it did? Okay, so that's one way to reflect. So then I'm going to erase this. I'm going to make another one. Another way to reflect using the reflect tool is you're just going to double click on this reflect tool over here. That's the reflect tool. Or you can select with O on your keyboard, but I'm going to double click. And now I get these options. So I can reflect horizontally or vertically, or I can select a specific angle. That's the one I think I may have just reflected across. But if you just want to do a simple vertical reflection, I'll click here. And if I want to preview and see what it's going to look like, I'll click in this box, and that shows you what it's going to look like if I reflect along that axis. Okay. And also I can copy to make a second star, so I can go like that, and they're reflected that way. Now, there's not a huge difference because the star sort of looks the same reflected that way. So let me reflect horizontally and give you a better vision of what it looks like. I'm trying to kind of make this stand up a little better. There we go. So now I've got that select. So I'll select here. I'll double click, and then I'm going to go horizontal. And if I preview, oh, now you can really see the difference, right? So that's reflecting on a horizontal just using this method. So those are two ways to reflect. Swatches are named colors, tints, gradients, and patterns in Illustrator. And the swatches associated with a document appear in what's called the swatches panel. So you can access the swatches panel by clicking on this icon right here. It sort of looks like a grid. Here it's underneath of just the color panel, but this is the icon for the swatches panel. You can select it that way, or if that's not showing up, you can go over to the drop-down menu for window and go down and find swatches, and it's right here. So you can select it either way. I'll click on that to select it. And then the swatches panel opens up. Now, with any panel, you can actually take the panel and rip it right out of its pop-up menu. So if I click on this tab right here and just pull out like this, now that panel is separated and I can work with it independently. I can resize it. You see how if I hover over the edges, different things come up. So I can sort of resize it this way. And right now, these are all the swatches that are active in this particular project. So these are my default swatches that come up. So as I said before, swatches can be named colors like these, or tints, which are over here. These are different amounts of black or white in a particular color. This is in the color guide panel. The best example of tints here are different tints from black to white in just the plain swatches panel. I'm going to collapse this. So, and then also there are color patterns available in swatches. This one's called Jive, and that one I guess is Alyssa. And these are just different patterns. And then there are gradients as well. We're going to deal just with solid colors in this video. So when you draw a shape or have anything on Illustrator, I'm just going to draw this rectangle. Right now, you can see it has got a fill value of white and a stroke value of black. The stroke's just 1 point, so I'm going to bump that up a little bit so you can see it better. And if I want to select a color, if I have my swatches panel open, I can see a whole variety of colors that I can choose from. So if I click on the fill panel there and then just select one of these, I'll select this cyan color there, and it changes it to that color. If I go down here and I just click once on the stroke value panel, then I can go over here and I can select this red color and make it that color. So it's that easy. Use the swatch panel to just have an easy access to different colors that you might want to use on an object. Another important thing is that you can open up new color libraries, and you can access them through this icon right here. It looks like some books, right? And it's a swatch libraries menu. I'll just click on that little down menu there, and you'll see that there are a number of different either groups of swatches or individual swatches. So groups of swatches are annotated by the triangle next to them, showing that there's a pull-out menu with even more swatches, or actually with some number of swatches available. And then just individual swatches that are here don't have that drop-down triangle next to them. I'm going to select this swatch group library called Visibone 2, and then that's going to pop out here in its own panel. And if I expand that, you can see the whole thing. And the great thing about Visibone is that these are web safe colors. So these will work really well in HTML, or just if you're creating a website, anything for the web. These are going to show very true on on many people's web pages on their phones. This is what these colors are going to look like all the time. Some of the other library groups are going to contain stuff for inks or print medium. So I open that up, and now let's say I want to change the color of the fill on this rectangle. I can just go over here, find a good green perhaps, and select that, and it'll change to that color. And again, the reason you're choosing this library is because in this instance, it would be you're working on a web project, and you want to make sure you're selecting colors that are going to be appropriate for a website. And Visibone is going to be a library where every color in it is going to be optimized or correct for using in the web. So again, I could change the stroke just like this. And that's just a brief overview of swatches and using the swatch panel. Now let's go ahead and use the gradient tool to put some groovy colors on stuff. So I'm going to put a couple of shapes here and show you how the gradient tool affects things. So let's do a star first. There we go. And let's do a circle. So when I draw this ellipse, I'm going to hold down the shift button to make it a circle. Except I have to hold down the right shift button. There we go. I have two keyboards in front of me, and I was holding down shift on a keyboard not connected to this computer. Not going to work. There we go. So that, and let's go ahead and do rectangle 2. All right, now let's take a look at how this gradient tool colors stuff. So I'm going to select, let's just start with this one. So I'm going to select that, and then we want the gradient tool, and it actually is right here. I've got it up on my sidebar, so you can select it by clicking there, or you could go to your Windows drop-down menu, find gradient, and select that. Either one will work. So there's my gradient tool. This is selected. So now I'm just gonna tear this off so you can look at it more easily. So there it is. And the first thing I want to do, if I just want to add a regular gradient, then I'm going to double click somewhere on this slider. And now, actually, that created 2 sliders. So what this does is gives me 3 different reference points. So at this side of the gradient, it's right now white, and at this side, it's black. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the stroke value to make it a little easier to see what's going on. I'm going to go back over to here. All right, so now here's our slider, and this is super basic gradient, all right? What I'll do is, first you see you've got white here and black here, and as I slide, it's going to move the transition. I can also affect the transition. See up here, these are between each individual thing. So nothing's going to happen here because that's white to white. But on the white to black, it's going to have the same effect as when I was sliding this because of the way it's set up. All right. So now let's change this middle color to something else. So I double click on it and I get the option of changing the color. And you can go grayscale, CMYK, website, web safe, any of that. Or if I want to go to the swatches, which I prefer, I'm going to click here. And now I'm going to click on a color and I'll choose, let's do blue. So now you can see the gradient is going from white to blue to black. So I've selected it that way. Now I can move my sliders here and change the gradient that way. Move my sliders here, change the gradient that way. I can move these down here again and just notice how this is affecting the gradient. Okay. Now, if I want to change the black, I can double click. I've still got my swatches up. I can decide, I'm going to make that green. And I could change the white. Let's see, I'm going to change that to red. So now here's this gradient. So you get an idea of how these controls work on a gradient. Okay? So there's that. Now, right now, this has got what's called a linear gradient. If I click this drop down, I can switch it to a radial gradient, and check this out. Okay? So now your gradient is radiating out from the center of the object that you put the gradient on. Okay? I could do that again here. On this circle, I'll just, again, I'm going to get rid of the stroke around it. I'm going to stay here. I can now select on my gradient menu, and it's going to go to that gradient that I just created. Okay, and of course I can alter the gradient. It's only going to alter it now on the object that's selected, right? So that's a radial gradient on there. If I switch it to a linear gradient, then it'll go back to this linear gradient. I can do the same thing on the star. And hey, I'll go ahead and leave the stroke on the star this time. Double click. Now I added yet another color. See, by double clicking down here, I can add more color options. Now watch if I go here. So let's do the rainbow. Roy G. Biv, right? So red. Double click on it. Orange. Yellow. Move this over a little bit. Double click, right? And green. Roy G. Then I need blue here. So I'm going to have to create another one. And I'll make it blue. Then indigo, which I think is purple-ish. That's really not probably the color. I want this color purple, I think. And then violet will be a real light kind of purple, I think. We'll just do it like that. I don't know if that's really right. I always get confused about the last color on there. But there you go. So I've created that linear gradient. And if I want to change it to radial, I just click here. So gradients are a lot of fun. Do a lot of things with them. You sort of have to experiment with them to get good at using them, but they really add a lot to your images. Once you finish creating a piece of artwork in Illustrator, you're going to need to export it to the proper file type. For our purposes here, we're going to work primarily with JPEGs and PNGs, and let's talk about that just a little bit. So first, let's just start with a JPEG. So I'm going to create a simple polygon. Let's make a star. There it is. And let's say I've created the star, and now I need to export it. If I export it as a JPEG, it's going to go like this. So File, Export, Export As. So I'm using the drop-down File menu up here. File, Export, Export As. And then I'm going to choose down here JPEG, JPG. And I'll just call this star, and I'll actually put JPG on here in my title so that I know it's supposed to be a JPEG, but it's going to have the file extension .jpg when you export it anyway, so this is very redundant. In fact, I'll go ahead and get rid of that because it's kind of dumb. Star JPEG, and I'm going to put it on the desktop, and I'll click Export. And click OK. So now, on my desktop, there's the star. Now, take a look if I open this up with my preview. See how it's got that white background around it? That's because it's a JPEG. Let's look at the difference. Actually, I'll leave that open. And leave it right here. And now, let's export it as a PNG. So I'll go back to Illustrator File, Export. Once again, Export, Export As. And PNG, and we'll call it star again, but this time it's going to have the extension .png on it, and I'll export. Click OK. Okay, so now here's the PNG, and let's do open with preview. Now, I don't know how easy it is for you to see this. This one has the white background. This one does not. Okay, this is the star JPEG. This is the star PNG. Okay, JPEGs do not have transparent backgrounds. That's why you have this white area here. PNG files do have transparent backgrounds, so you only get the piece of artwork that you created and no background elements added in. So a lot of the time when you're exporting for use on the web on a site, you're going to export as a PNG file so that you can just place whatever item you've created in the context of your website without also bringing in this plain white background color. Okay, everybody, so that's the gist of Adobe Illustrator, and hopefully you can use your critical thinking skills to take the information found in that, apply it to what you learned or will learn from watching the crash course videos, depending on what order you're doing all of this in, about data visualization, and can kind of put that information together to create 5 great data visualizations of some sort of data that you collect yourself. Put all that stuff in a Google slide presentation and get it turned into me. Looking forward to seeing your work. Thanks, everybody.